All right. Hey, everybody. So today is our office hours, first office hours for the project. Every office hour, I have like a thing that I'm going to present to you all, and then the rest of the time will be just used for project questions. So I put the office hour schedule on the homeroom. So today I'm just going to talk about organizing code and notebooks and a little bit about Git. Tomorrow I'll be talking about presentations, and Thursday I'll be talking about READMEs. Um, don't forget that we're presenting the product on Friday. I know I haven't talked about presentations yet, but on Friday during the study group time, you all will be presenting your PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to talk about how you're going to go about creating tomorrow. Don't forget also that schedule your project review between June 14th and June 25th. I know not everyone meets with me every single week. So if you don't normally meet with me for one-on-ones, please schedule a project review. And in this case, because you are presenting it to me, just schedule a regular one-on-one, like a 30-minute time slot. That should be good enough. Unless you anticipate that you have a bunch of questions to ask about the project. Okay, so you might have just gotten an email that phase 2 material is out. So phase 2 material has just been released. I've linked it down here for now, but definitely don't worry about it now. The project is definitely the priority, but just in case you're curious, the phase 2 material is out and we will get to that next week. So if anyone doesn't see the phase 2 material, just let me know, but you should have access to that now, just make sure. Cool. Any questions about any of that before we get into some like organizational tips? All right. Okay, so I wanted to talk about my expectations for what I want your Jupyter notebooks to look like, or what to include in a Jupyter notebook, what I don't need to see, so on and so forth. I don't know if y'all have seen this yet, but under phase 1, and it's under the module of, here, let me go to student view real quick so you all know what it looks like. Under online milestones instructions, there's actually a project template and examples link that will actually bring you to this GitHub repo here that has examples of projects and templates if you just want like some help on structuring your notebook. So this is an example project. AAB stands for above and beyond. So this is like the, I guess like a really high quality project. And MVP stands for minimum viable product. So it's like a, I guess, bare essentials kind of project. Feel free to use any of these, feel free to peruse these. The products are different. And for disclaimer, these like example projects were done by other instructors. So you're not expected to like have it like this perfect, I guess. I'll talk more about the README and how you put that together on Thursday, because this is not due on Friday. This is due whenever right before your review. But I wanted to point you all to their notebook. So the way that they set up their GitHub in this example is they just have one final notebook that if, I mean, this project for some people, they do it individually, but if there's 2 of you working or 3 of you working on this project, you should have everything packaged into clean final notebooks. So whether it's just one here, like in this case, you just have one notebook, but maybe you have multiple, those should be clean notebooks. And then all of like the Scratchwork notebook go into here. Like if you have, I don't know, like let's say you're just testing a bunch of things or you're just like exploring the data sets, they should go into another notebook, and you should make it obvious via the file name that it isn't part of like your final presentation Jupyter notebook. So this is just one example of how you can set up your repository. All of these other files, like the PI, you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so I just want to show you all what this notebook looks like. And this is kind of similar to what I'm expecting out of your notebooks. And I'll point out the things that I'm going to be looking out for. Your notebook and or the way to think about how you should set up and present your notebook is this is going to be part of your portfolio. And in the future, employers are going to be, clicking on your GitHub links and looking at, either your project or maybe even your code if it's a technical recruiter. So let's say in your notebook, you only have the code and the processes that you're writing to, do your analysis. That's not going to be enough, because for them to know what you're thinking, your thought processes, they need to have some commentary. So I think this is a good example of a very complete notebook. I would like to see this as well. Maybe not like all of the exact same sections, but this is something that's actually a pretty good thing to follow. Even though you have an introduction to your project probably in your README or probably somewhere else in your repo, I do think it's a good idea to have it in your notebook. So just in case you have a recruiter that doesn't feel like opening multiple tabs of your one project in different places, you can have everything that they would need to see in one single place. So you can see here in this example, they're doing, I guess, an Austin Animal Center needs analysis. They talk about their overview. They talk about the business problem. They talk about what their data is like. And then the commentary does weave in pretty nicely with the code. So you can see here, there's a lot of commentary going on explaining their thought processes or explaining just the code processes that they're going to. And lots of markdown cells. You can see there's markdown cells here, here. Every few cells, there's some markdown. It's really up to you how you want to structure this. I know some people like to do like a lot of analyses and then some interpretation sandwiched by like maybe like a bit of like, this is what I'm going to do in the next few steps, something like that. Really up to you and what you and your group mates think is, I guess, natural and comfortable. At this moment, I also want to talk about the differences between commenting your code and putting info in a markdown cell. So by default, you should have comments for your code explaining what each line, you don't have to have like a comment per line saying, oh, this line is dropping columns, this line is merging. You don't really have to do that. I would say every few, I guess this one doesn't even have too many comments, but here you can see that as anytime it's not something that's very obvious what you're doing in code, comments explain specifically the code, like specifically like syntax or a function that you're defining. Those are what comments are for. If you want to describe thought processes, commentary, interpretation, conclusions, those should be in markdown cells. So that's the difference between the two. I've seen notebooks where students do their interpretation in a bunch of like comments in like a single cell. That works too, honestly, but I do think it looks cleaner if your commentary and your interpretation does come in these markdown cells. Just so there's a bit of differentiation. I think as a recruiter, you don't have to look at every little bit of code, but you do want to find out how someone is interpreting and how someone is making conclusions on the project. So it's good to have that, that distinction there. So based on that, do think about structuring your notebook in something like this. I would say it's a good idea to maybe like come up with some sections. Some examples of how you section out your notebook could be, there are some projects that I've seen that section out their notebook based on which data set they're cleaning. So let's say you're cleaning all of like the IMDb data first, and then the TMDB. Those could be your sections as well, followed by maybe the questions that you're trying to answer, like question 1, question 2, question 3. And each question has like the question itself, the data cleaning that's associated with it, and then the visualization and then interpretation. Many different ways to go about it. Again, I think something to really think about is clarity. And if you can like show your notebook to someone else and have someone sort of follow the narrative that you're taking and follow the process that you're taking for this project, that's what we're looking for. So in this example notebook, we can see here that, yes, you have your graphs and all that. And then there's also some interpretation. So you can see that there's a little bit of interpretation with each visualization. That's what I would like to see as well. And then at the very end, this is kind of important. I think I've seen many notebooks where it just like ends with a visualization and that's it. It's very important to summarize your results. Many times, and I've talked to recruiters about this as well, they scroll to the bottom just because they want to see your conclusions, but then it's just like a graph or like a random like code cell that doesn't really tie anything together. So you do want to end with like conclusions and then next steps if you have any like next steps. And for this project, you should have next steps as well. So for those of you who are just joining us, where I'm finding this example repo is in phase 1 under online milestones instructions. There's templates and examples. And then within that, you can choose, you can look for the examples here. And if you want to just grab a template, you can grab a template from here as well. So feel free to use these. I feel like probably easier to just like look at it and then apply it to your own rather than working on like cloning this. This does make it a little bit more complicated. But yeah, those are my thoughts on like putting it together. Questions about that? I do want to talk about next, like when you're working with multiple people, what this result should look like. Okay, so if you intend on, because I know that some pairs are working a little bit more, I guess, independently, which is absolutely fine, as long as you're still communicating. If you're working a little bit more independently and then you find that, you know, maybe like person A's work and person B's work doesn't really overlap too much, and you can pretty much have like two half projects, I guess. Honestly, that's fine with me. And the way that you should present your material is still have some consistency, at least work together and figuring out, okay, how do I want to define my business case? How do I want to define like my overall conclusions and so on and so forth? Because your overall conclusions should still align. So as an example, let's just go to this one for now. Let's say each of you decide to take 2 questions. You should both have matching overviews and business problems in your notebook. And maybe even in your notebook, you talk about the fact that on another notebook, maybe put the notebook title there so that someone can refer to it. If you want to mess around with hyperlinks and like figuring out how to link one notebook to the other, you can do that as well. In another notebook, you can see these other 2 questions analysis. But every presentation notebook should have this structure, even if you're doing like, even if you're submitting 2 separate notebooks. Another format of doing this is, which I've seen, and this is, I would say, more for like people who are doing this project solo, but just for future reference. I've seen it where you have one entire like EDA notebook, or it's just like, sorry, not EDA, but one entire like data cleaning notebook, and then one notebook just for creating visualizations. If you're doing it that way, then try and make it such that they flow nicely into each other. So start your EDA notebook or start your data cleaning notebook with your business problem, your overview, end it with, okay, I'm exporting my CSVs to be used in my visualization notebook. You can do that as well, by the way. And then in that visualization notebook, do not assume that someone would have already read your first notebook before going into the second. So do summarize any important things from the first notebook, and then talk about it in your second visualization notebook. If you're unclear or if you're not sure whether things are clear enough in your notebooks, let me know, send them over. I'm more than happy to take a look over your work, especially before presentations. So any questions about like expectations of how your presentation Jupyter notebooks should look like? Okay, so in terms of structure, that's the kind of structure that I'm hoping to see. Now, in terms of code, I've gotten some questions about to what extent should we include all the things that we've tried out? For your presentation notebook, you don't have to show all the things that didn't work. For things that didn't work, you can either get rid of it or put it in like a scratchwork notebook. That's actually the way I like to work. I actually like, when I'm doing any project, I start with a very, very messy notebook with all of my code. And then when I'm mostly done with the process, I sort of like redo the project by like copy and pasting only the necessary things over. That's one approach that you can take. I'm assuming that most of you are now in that messy notebook stage. I would say also, if there's some, let's say you like started formulating a question, and then through like data cleaning and through trying to make the visualization, you realize that it didn't really work out. It's up to you what you want to do with that. I would say it's not the best idea to have like incomplete processes in a presentation notebook, but if you think, you know, you can still learn something from that analysis not working out, feel free to include it. Or just have like a separate notebook with like, I don't know, maybe things that didn't work out. Most importantly, your presentation notebook should be able to run top to bottom without anything breaking. And then also just have like the most relevant code. You don't want to over clutter your notebook. If you're doing like a lot of like dot describes and dot infos, just make sure that it's easy to read. So I would say like when you're getting ready to like putting your final notebook together, just make sure you can scroll top to bottom and it's not too overwhelming. Like this project is pretty much the same kind of project that you all are doing, but this notebook is not like overwhelmingly long. Yeah, any questions about that? Because next I'm going to talk a little bit about GitHub. Cool. So with regards to GitHub, you all should have set up your GitHub repository by now, and all teammates should have at least tried and attempted to push their changes onto the GitHub repository or their own branch, which is within the GitHub repository as well. Try to do that by today or tomorrow. You definitely think of that as saving your work. The number of students that I've had that like are like halfway done with the project because they don't like successfully push their stuff up to GitHub. Something happens and they lose all their progress. So it's super, super important to remember to do that. If anyone's having any trouble at all with getting their material onto GitHub, please let me know. I will say Git is one of the most like, what's the word, finicky, hard to understand things with all of coding. So please let me know if you're having any issues with that, because it's very, very important that you do commit and push your work periodically. I would say even like if you can do this once a day or multiple times a day, that would be ideal, just so that your work gets saved and you don't lose anything. If you want to be like extra careful and you're like afraid of overwriting something, especially when you're doing some sort of merge or pull request, I like to do this sometimes, especially if it's like a big chunk of work that I'm doing. I like to make a copy of all the files and put it somewhere else on my computer, just in case. So know that you can do that as well if you just want like a safety net, just in case you accidentally delete your work, which a lot of students have done in the past. But you definitely want to be committing your work. So that when you submit your project, I would like to see more than 2 to 3 commits on your repo. You definitely want to have your commit numbers up. The worst thing you could see, and I don't know if anyone's seen this yet, but if you have like a GitHub repository here, and these are your commit messages, right? Like when you do git commit -m, this is what you have in the quotes after the -m. If you see people, there is a file upload option for GitHub where you can just upload your completed files, and automatically that commit message will say add files via file upload or something like that. That is not what you want to do, because once an employer sees that, and especially if they don't see any other commit messages, they're going to be, oh, this person doesn't really know how to work with Git. This person doesn't really understand how to use what's the word, tracking. Oh my gosh. Just doesn't really know how to use Git. I can't think of the phrase for it right now, but you know what I mean. So yeah, you definitely want to avoid that. And you want to have like a good number of commits per project, just so that they're aware that you know how to use this technology. But yeah, please let me know if you're having any Git issues. I will tell you that like, I think most of the questions that I've gotten so far are regarding Git. I think I've got like messages from almost every pair working on this project regarding Git. So please keep them coming. Git is one of the hardest parts of the course. I probably did not feel comfortable with Git until like more than 6 months after I graduated. So just let me know if y'all have any issues with that. But yeah, any questions regarding Git? I mentioned that I do recommend using branches, but you don't have to use branches if you don't want to. If you're not using branches, it becomes more important to communicate when you're pushing your work. So yeah. All right, any other questions? Cool, let me stop the recording here.